Hi, and welcome to this snow delay day. So I have 10 minutes lecture left, and I will talk to you about electron transport chain and ATP synthesis through this video instead of meeting you in person. Electron transport chain and ATP synthesis taken together are called oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation. Phosphorylation because when we make ATP, we're putting a phosphate on there. So that's the phosphorylation part. Oxidative because there's a redox process that drives this. So we learned from the citric acid cycle, we get NADH. We're reducing NAD plus to NADH. So the citric acid cycle provides a lot of NADH. That NADH reacts with oxygen, and that's a downhill reaction. So I wrote down what's uphill and downhill over here. So the redox reaction is downhill. So what we have is, two NADHs and an oxygen dioxygen molecule reacts to NAD plus and water. So just to get it clear again with the NADH and NAD plus, the citric acid cycle reduces NAD plus to NADH, and in the electron transport chain, that NADH gets oxidized by oxygen. That's a reaction that provides a lot of energy. And this energy is used to drive ATP synthesis. So ATP synthesis is an uphill reaction. It takes energy to make ATP. The flip side is that if we hydrolyze ATP, that becomes an energy molecule. That's a way of gaining energy. So whenever we want to run something, we couple it with the hydrolysis. So in the direction I'm showing it here, in this direction, it's uphill. The reason we're making ATP is then we can hydrolyze the ATP in other processes, and that's a downhill reaction. Okay? We'll get to the proton transport in a second. Okay, so what happens in electron transport chain is that we have a redox reaction that's downhill. Again, the NADH reacting with oxygen, and I'll show you the details in a minute. And we want to drive a different reaction, which is ATP synthesis. That's an uphill reaction. There's 4 enzymes that help with the redox reaction. They're called complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. And today we'll ignore complex 2. So we just have to understand what complex 1, 3, and 4 do. And then complex 5 has nothing to do with redox processes. That's the machine that makes the ATP. Okay, so let's look at what happens in a stepwise manner. All of these enzymes are located on the mitochondrial inner membrane. So they're sticking out into the matrix on one side and into the intermembrane space on the other side. And it's very important that they're part of a membrane because the pH in the matrix and the intermembrane space is different. Or another way of saying that is here in the diagram on the top, we have a lot of protons, a lot of H pluses, and in the matrix we have a lack of protons. And it's those protons that really drive the whole thing. So that's the last thing we have to know about energy. If you want to transport a proton from a proton poor environment, like the matrix, into a proton rich environment, so to a higher concentration, that costs energy. So transporting a proton in this direction is uphill, and transporting a proton in the other direction is downhill. Okay, so let's look at the redox reaction. The redox reaction doesn't just go on by itself, but the energy that's available from it is used to pump protons. So our first reaction is down here. NADH gets oxidized. That's a loss of electrons. The electrons, this reaction happens on the matrix side of complex 1, and then the electrons get transferred within the enzyme to a different active site. This active site binds to this electron carrier Q. So we have Q binding here, picking up 2 electrons. That means it gets reduced. Then Q diffuses over to complex 3. Gives off electrons, so it gets oxidized again. These electrons get transferred to a small molecule, a small protein molecule called cytochrome C. It's called cytochrome because it's colored. It has an iron in it, but we don't need to know these details. So cytochrome C gets reduced because it gets the electrons in complex 3. And then the whole cytochrome C molecule or protein moves over to complex 1 and gives off the electrons again, so it gets oxidized, and complex 4 picks up 1 electron after the other until it has 4 electrons, and then it has enough electrons to run the reaction with oxygen. So an O2 picks up 4 electrons, gets reduced to water. So the net reaction is that NADH reacts with oxygen, but they don't really see each other. Instead, NADH gives off some electrons to complex 1. Those get transported from complex 1 to complex 3 by this small electron carrier Q. Then electrons get transported from complex 3 to complex 4 by the cytochrome C electron carrier, which is really a whole protein moving back and forth between those complexes. And then in the end, those electrons get transferred to oxygen on complex 4. Okay. What I didn't show you yet is that at the same time that happens, whenever one of these redox processes takes place, that's a downhill reaction, and it drives an uphill reaction of transporting protons from the matrix to the intermembrane space. In one case, it's 4 protons. In the other case, it's also 4 protons here for complex 3, and for complex 4, it happens to be just 2 protons. But at the end, we have a total of 10 protons being transported. Okay, so we're coupling a downhill reaction, the redox reaction, with an uphill reaction transporting protons towards the higher concentration, so towards the intermembrane space. None of this made any ATP yet. So what happened here is we're building up this proton gradient. And then there's one more complex, complex 5. Complex 5 runs a reaction that's uphill. This reaction is an uphill reaction. And in order to drive this, you have protons going down the gradient, 4 of them, and that's how you drive this reaction. So those are the details of the electron transport chain and ATP synthesis. Again, together we call those oxidative phosphorylation because we're using a redox process to phosphorylate ATP or turn ADP into ATP. And just to repeat the energetics of this, reacting NADH with oxygen is a downhill reaction. It provides all the energy for this process. It's coupled with proton transport. Whether proton transport is uphill or downhill depends on the direction. So in the electron transport chain, protons are pumped up the gradient. So the energy is stored in the form of the proton gradient. And then for the ATP synthesis, the protons are the complex 4 lets the protons travel down the gradient, so that's a downhill reaction, and that drives ATP synthesis. And again, ATP synthesis is uphill. So whenever the body wants to make ATP, that costs some energy. That comes from food. In animals and plants, it would come from the sunlight directly. And the good thing about having ATP is that hydrolyzing the ATP, on the other hand, because it's the opposite direction, is a downhill reaction. So whenever something that takes work or takes energy needs to be done in the body, if you couple it to ATP synthesis, you can drive that reaction to go ahead. To ATP hydrolysis, right? So ATP hydrolysis drives the uphill reactions in the body.